Well, welcome back. I was in the middle of doing a total teardown and rebuild of my son's Manta, drive shaft, rear end, front end, engine, putting a 5-speed in it, just some basic small maintenance items. And it dawned on me that we had to rebuild the torque tube. And most of the time, it tends to be the case that almost every Opel owner, be it Opel GT, Opel Manta, Kadett B, Kadett C, and many of the others need to do this as well. So why not a video? So with the axle assembly out of the car, it's kind of easy to show you some of the basics of how to take it apart and all the little pieces, parts of it. I apologize for not having a dirty, nasty one to show you and all the things you're going to have to fight, like trying to take out the 4 bolts that hold the actual torque tube right there onto the differential, because those are probably, if they're still original, triple squares, and they're probably going to strip on you, and you're probably going to need to use a pair of vice grips to get them off. Kind of a typical common problem, much like the torque tube itself. So if you're here, you probably hear that thump anytime you take you put your car into gear and you take up on the drive shaft. That's usually because this donut right here has died, and also the rubber stops have also possibly died. They make replacements for those. You can get them at your Opel GT source, Opel's Unlimited, Edelsheim, all the usual sources, because these are very common parts that need to be replaced regularly. So how do you go about taking the torque tube out? Well, the one thing you're going to want to do is you're going to be wanting to support your axle in the rear, similar to what I see here, but you're also going to want to put a jack right here. And you're going to want to support this nose. And if you're lucky and you get everything nice and tight there, you'll be able to take it out, and then you're going to unbolt the bolts that, in the Manta's case, you want these 2 bolts slide out of the chassis. But on the GT, around here, and the Kadett, and around here, there are 2 holes with bolts that go into the body. I'm in America, so unfortunately there's not a whole lot of Kadett C's or Manta B's or Ascona C's, that kind of thing around here for us to play with. So I'm assuming it's very, very similar to that. In the torque tube itself is going to bolt in some way into the body. You're going to undo those. Then you're going to unbolt the 4 bolts here. Like I said, the fun part is getting them out. They're triple squares. And when you're done taking those out, you'll also have to take off the brake lines. You'll have to get the e-brake out of the way. That kind of stuff will be pretty self-explanatory when you're up under the car. You'll slide the whole assembly out of the car. Now, once you've got your torque tube there, what you're going to do is, under the torque tube, you'll notice that there are 2 bolts, one there and one here. They hold on these supports right here. Once you have those 2 bolts out, you'll be able to just slide the shaft with the rubber mount out from this assembly. Now, the reason you'll be able to come out is because the only thing that holds this in, the entire assembly here, is the rubber donut. And given the fact that your rubber donut is probably bad or flopping around, the chances of you being able to slide out that torque tube are pretty high. So once you pull it out, then you're just going to cut the rubber and remove it, and then you'll have your bare shaft available. All right, so this is a Manta shaft, but the GT shaft is very, very similar, and basically it's the same parts. But you have your shaft, and this is where your rubber donut was before you had to cut it off. You're going to have to beat this off. This is not going to be fun, and getting the nut off also not. You're going to need an air tool to do it. You can't just do it with your regular hand tool. Alright, so what you're going to do is you're going to take the shaft and put it in a vise, and then you're going to have to hit it here repeatedly. Be very careful, as I've already pointed out. Do not hit the bearing or the shells if at all possible. That's not because those shells are very thin. So once you got that off, you'll realize that there'll be a washer. So nut and a washer. Nut and a washer. Then the yoke comes off, and this is what that's going to look like. You see there's a little groove here. You're probably going to beat this rim a little bit. I did. You might have to just go back and clean it up a little. Then, when this comes off, this will fly out. It's basically a nice big, thick, fitted washer, and it sits behind the yoke right there. It's just there to show it. And then this here is the bearing and shells. That's the fun part. Sometimes they don't like to come out, and you're going to have to be very careful because they're really thin shells. Sometimes what I've found the best luck is take this, but don't beat it all the way off. Get it really close to coming off. Then you'll have a little bit of, you'll have this on the shaft, and you can still mess with trying to get the shell off. And let me show you something. So like I said, that'll come off. You'll have this, which will tend to fly out. You gotta go find it. And then your bearing. Like I said, so that'll come off here, and that's pretty much it. And then, like I said, this will be both of these have already taken apart, obviously, because it's a little hard to show that. But as again, like I said, with the big hammer, to get these off, you're gonna have to be careful so you don't bend these flanges up. And as I mentioned, getting this off, getting these apart can be quite the challenge sometimes. Like in this case, you know, normally sometimes you take a screwdriver and you split them and you just keep working it and you'll get those shells to split. But it's not always going to be that easy. And here's why. There's nothing holding them together. This is the bearing that's going to be inside. And it just sits right on there. But it literally is a tight fit. As you can see, some of these slide over really easy. Like that one did, but that one didn't. And if I press this, that's going to be real hard to get that off. And then you're going to pack this area in with some bearing grease when you put this together. And then I'll show you how to do that. All right. With your first one together, then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put it gently in the vise, very gently, because it's not going to take much pressure. You don't want to damage anything, but you want to try to get nice even pressure. You see how that kind of, and then when you feel it stop, you kind of know you're right where it needs to be. You see it came in kind of nice and even. You take your other one and line up the shells. As I mentioned, you need those to be lined up really good. All right. Just back in the vise. Center it nice and tight there, and then gently just give it a little nudge. And now your bearing is good, and you're ready to go. So here you have it. You have basically your torque tube shaft, the torque tube bearing and shell, your spacer, your washer, your nut, and the fork itself. And of course your favorite, the torque tube bushing, the donut. This is where you're going to put that over here and let that sit right there. Now, you can, if you don't want to replace this bearing, it's still a good idea to take this off but leave the bearing in place. If you don't have a whole lot of howling or whining, you can check. It should be pretty good. Clean it up, fresh grease. Don't even bother about pulling the shell apart. Just clean it up, spray it in there. But if you're going to have all this on and you still have to replace this bushing, it's a little tight. And so there have been people, and myself included, that PV blaster, a little bit of heat, and you slide it over this end, and then you'll refit it here. That does damage to these. So just know that you're probably shortening the life of your bushing, of the donut. I mean, if you do it right, some of them have gotten a lot better. There was a period of time where the reproductions were really, really sketchy, and they were also made out of a poly that did not like heat at all. And if you heated these up and tried to slide them over, it would work. But as soon as you did, about a couple months later, your thumpity thumps are going to come back. So it's best, if you can, to do it properly as per the manual and actually put this in. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back together, and I'll show you how this goes in. It's pretty straightforward. So we're going to have that, like I said, we'll have that in there here. Get it over. As you see, even here, it's a little, might be a little bit of a pain to get over, but not big, no problem. All right, so once you do that, get your shaft clean, then we put the bearing together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, get you a little bit, get you a little bit of bearing grease, and just pack it up in there. Nice and clean. Don't need too much. Just need enough. So you're going to wipe it off. You don't want to get too excess in there, because if you get too much excess, it's going to be inside the torque tube donut. So you get that on there, get nice and lubed, slide it over there, and voila. It's pretty much that simple. Then you take your sleeve, slide that on there. Just put a little grease in here, just make sure you get the grease the teeth up a little bit. Make this go on here a little nice, little loop there. Well, there really is no torque. The torque on this is go down until it won't go down no more. And usually at that point, when you get to that point, you'll notice that this notch that you already had in here and your nut that you got off earlier, they're aligned again. And then just take a screwdriver or chisel and basically tap them back in place. And then that will be the end of that. Now, as far as the tube is concerned, a little light grease, just a little bit, doesn't have to be much, just a little bit on your finger, to get it over this. That's all you're going to need. And now what you're going to notice is that in here, you'll see those line up with these, and that's pretty much it. When you get this in, go here, line up your spots there, and then you squeeze it. You get a little bit up there. There you go. And double check, but that's it. And that's ready to go in. Now one of the things, so now it's time to get the torque tube out itself and show you how this goes in. Okay, so you've rebuilt your torque tube shaft, your new torque tube bearing on, and your torque tube donut on, and you're ready to reassemble it. Well, by this time you should have also cleaned up your torque tube bracket, mounting bracket. This will vary depending on which car you have. This is a Manta A. Manta Bs are similar. GTs have a little smaller. They don't have the outriggers. There's a lot of variances in that, but this part right here is always pretty much the same. And you're going to have your bump stops, as we said before. We got your bump stop top and bottom bump stops. You'll get the new ones, press the new ones in. Again, sorry I didn't go over some of this when I was doing the video. I didn't quite think about doing a video until I was already halfway through the project. So, but pretty much, there's a square hole here, and you push the bushing in, and then you have it sitting there. So you'll have this cleaned up and ready to go. Then you will have the tube itself, the torque tube itself, cleaned up, ready to go. New torque tube bump stops here for your torque tube. And of course your shaft, as we mentioned before. Let's get started. How do you put the torque tube donut in? Well, as you can see right here, there are these little tabs in the way. Well, when you pulled your old one out, it just came out most of the time. It was ripped, torn, and maybe you had a few places you had to cut it, but you didn't mess with those. So you're going to see that they're bent down. What we'll do first is we're going to take a little pair of pliers, and we're going to bend these. Don't bend them too much, because they will rip out. Reach in, grab one of the teeth grab one of them and just bend it a little bit. Doesn't have to be much, just a little. You're not trying to get it all out of the way. Just go and do that for all 6 of them. Get it in your lap. Slide it down in there. And then the fun begins. Just let Mother Nature and weight do, gravity do its toll on there. And with a big screwdriver, just slide it in place and push down. You'll see it just kind of gives. Let's go a little bit more. Just keep going around because right now you're just trying to get the first ring in. So I'm gonna bring this around, bring the screwdriver around. Get these to go in. There you go. So you see that front, top of them like to pop in, not too bad. It's the bottom one here that can sometimes give you a pain. And also they'll also be sitting inside that little clip that you bent a little bit. Just kind of see them getting in there. There you go. It'll be nice and nice, and it won't pop around, and it won't be moving out like your old one did. You see right there, and you're done. All right, now you have that in. Now you're going to want to put your tube in. So you're going to just slide this over the torque tube shaft, and now your trick is what you're trying to do here is that the holes right here, you can see right there, line up with these, and you'll notice on your supports here, you have a little round spot here. This round piece is going to go pop into there, so it's going to make it pretty easy. So aligning the bolts is not terribly difficult once you get this step done. So slide that in, and then you're going to basically the screwdrivers in here, just pull the pressure down on it, and get that in. And depending how fresh they are, newer ones or the bigger, heavier duty ones, those can sometimes be a lot more fun to get in. And fun meaning difficult. Kind of sit there and kind of like the other one, just sit down and go in. And you heard that click. That's because that one popped in place where it needed to be. And now this one's on the other side, and we can, if we're lucky, we push it in there and see. That one did not quite get in there. Oh, there it goes, and now it is. So now we got it in, and next step is relatively simple. You get your bolts. I like to use a little bit of orange Loctite on them. If you're using the original bolts, which is probably preferred, the original bolts do have a nice washer and everything else. It just happens to be I don't have any of them. Both the axles I had when I was working with did not have them because the previous owner had replaced them or they fell out. A lot of times they shake out, so you just won't even have them. In those cases, like I said, I make sure you use a flange bolt. It's a standard M8 125 and about a 16 millimeter long one. It doesn't have to be very long because it's only going in through a piece of sheet metal into the mount and holding the mount in place. And it's just bolt them in. All right, so now you have your torque tube assembly done. Before we go any further, I wanted to make sure that you guys know that you have the triple square bolts that you've replaced. You probably had to pull out with a pair of vice grips or something because they tend to strip. The replacement is a 25 millimeter M1.25 hardened bolt. You really do want to make sure they're hardened because there's a lot of torque going on here because it's a torque tube. So before we put the torque tube back on, I wanted to make sure that you knew two things. One, if you really appreciated this video and appreciated my other Opel-centric videos or the Bosch injection videos, hitting that subscribe button would be awesome at this point in time. I really would appreciate it. But other than that, you'll also need to go ahead and replace this oil seal here for your pinion. A lot of times that's what causes a lot of these things to fail. They even have a weep hole here to tell you that that seal is leaking. That's why you'll get this oil mess around here. But one of the reasons they want you to know it's leaking is because that oil's got to go somewhere, and it will start getting over everything. And we're talking about like like the reason you're here today, replacing the torque tube, replacing the mounts, replacing the bump stops, things of that nature. But after you're done, so once you've replaced that and you're about ready, I want to put a little bit of grease on the outside of here to make sure your seal, so you can lubricate that so you don't run it dry. A little bit on the teeth here to make it install a little bit easier. And yeah, now let's install the tube. Installing the tube is very, very straightforward. Lift it up and slide it in place. That's pretty much it. Like I said, 25 millimeter M8.1 Allen. As long as it's not too hard, you just slide it in place. Get it all nice and set up there. And we do a bolt. There you go. That's it. And you're installed. Now the fun begins. A key piece of advice: if you're fighting putting the torque tube mount back on, and all you've done is take off the torque tube, go back through and loosen all your control arms, all these arms here, the panhard. Don't necessarily need to disconnect them, but loosen all the bolts there and disconnect the sway bar. If you have one on the car, that's going to make life a lot easier when you're when you go to install this part on the car. It likes to fight you. I don't really have any good advice other than the fact it likes to fight you. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this,